Hello everybody, I'm M, and welcome to Green Screen Entertainment. You know, I've been losing my faith in Western media as of late. More specifically, in its ability to tell a well-written, complex, and nuanced story with solid characters while also being entertaining. Sure, I enjoyed stuff like The Bad Batch or WandaVision to a lesser extent, but for as much flash and bang as those shows had, and as many inventive concepts as there were or had potential to be, they didn't really explore the characters or develop them in any meaningful way. Or even when they did, it just flat out wasn't that good. And for as much as I enjoy shows like Murdoch Mysteries or MASH for their stellar character work, they never really got my blood pumping, you know? However, my expectations got turned on their head relatively recently. Back in 2021, Netflix released Arcane, a show based on the game franchise League of Legends. A franchise that I can safely say prior that I had never cared about. Not maliciously, mind you, it just kind of flew under my radar.
Produced by Riot Games and the French animation studio Forchi, Arcane came out on Netflix in the fall of 2021, and to say the least, I was pleasantly surprised. Sure, I had heard positive things about it from others around me, but I hadn't exactly found the time to watch it for myself. But when I did, I found myself glued to the screen. This show is great. Phenomenal even. And as it stands now, it's an unfinished masterpiece.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Everybody wants to be your enemy, so quit fretting over what could have been. This is Green Screen Entertainment's review of Arcane, Season 1. Generally speaking, hand-drawn animation and CG animation don't really go super well together, as things like Kirby Right Back At Ya or MTV Spider-Man will tell you, it's like trying to repackage medication as goldfish crackers. People are gonna notice that something's off pretty darn quick. Especially when their vision starts getting blurry out of nowhere and their eyeballs start growing hair. Or maybe that's just me whenever I watch MTV Spider-Man.
Arcane is a show that mixes a healthy blend of 2D and 3D animation. To be more specific, the characters are 3D as well as aspects of the environment, but there never seems to be a moment where something hand-drawn isn't present. At first, the 2D animation effects really seem to contrast with everything else, but then I realized on my second viewing that it gives the show a unique visual style that meshes hand-drawn and CG styles in a way that doesn't clash, but instead looks more natural in a way that these combined techniques have never really looked before in my experience. The animation has fluid motion that can be absolutely stellar at times. And I don't just mean fluid motion for the sake of it. You can still do that and have it be awful. But the difference with Arcane is that everything moves so fluidly while still retaining the same level of detail, while never reaching the uncanny valley, however unintentionally. Smooth, but natural. This, combined with the somewhat angular art style, makes Arcane a masterpiece of animation when it's done right. The 3D models as well as the environments look so detailed and full of life, like these are actual locations instead of blatant sets that action figures are meant to inhabit. As far as I can tell, the textures were all hand-drawn and then overlaid onto 3D objects, something that I haven't really seen before with a couple of exceptions. But by skillfully combining both mediums in a way that lets both sides strut their stuff while not stepping on each other's toes, the production team has truly mastered the balance. I could spend hours picking apart every individual detail, every shadow, every dramatic angle, everything just looks so wonderful. Nothing should be placed by accident in a scene, and thankfully the fine folks at Riot and Forchi's production team knew exactly what they were doing. Everything from the character designs, the outfits, the lighting, to the perceived textures of the environment, everything works so cohesively to tell a visual story. The character animations are on point as well, with expressive animation and fluid movement that gives you the impression that these are people and not robots. From every minute expression, all the pieces of visual storytelling, even the little follow through someone's hair makes when that person moves, so much attention is paid, and I love that. The best part of the action here is that everything was animated from scratch. From the little things like the way a character walks, to the fast-paced fight scenes, to the little subtleties of facial expressions during the emotional scenes. The lack of motion capture means that it not only costs less in terms of physical setup, but it also means that the animators aren't restricted by laws of reality and can instead go full ham! Between the designs and the animation, the show looks phenomenal. But then, substance is always important, as captivating as style can be.
The plot of Arcane is something that I like to refer to as a beautiful mess. Please stop John Wicking me and let me explain.
It begins simply enough, focusing on a small group of kids and their surrogate father in the aftermath of a war between Piltover and the Undercity. At first, it seems like a relatively standard story, but that illusion dismisses itself pretty quickly after the first third of episode 1. From that point on, it becomes difficult to talk about the plot in a singular sense, because there's more going on here than a shopping mall on Black Friday, with about as much accidental murder. On one side, we have Vi and Powder. We follow these two as kids, with the only goal in life to keep each other safe. But on the flip side, we have Jace, an inventor in Piltover who wants to unlock the secrets of magic with technology. Both sides have intriguing stories on their own, but both run as foils to each other in a sense. They're opposites in terms of social class, the scope of their goals, their approach to dealing with whatever comes their way. The character writing and visual storytelling were on point here and didn't insult the audience with an overload of telling and not showing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For the first 3 episodes, this is the status quo before a massive catalyst upends all that we thought we knew. In an attempt to get her family out of a jam, Powder activates an invention of hers with an unstable gemstone containing raw power, a Hextech crystal. The result is an explosion that levels the warehouse, killing her surrogate brothers, killing Vander, causing one of Silco's goons to lose an arm. There's a lot that happens in that single blast. Vi is understandably upset and takes out her anger on Powder before leaving for a moment to cool her head. Silco, the main villain, took Powder under his wing while Vi was taken by an enforcer to prison. On the flip side of this is a huge success, as Jace finally cracks the code of magic and invents Hextech with one of those same crystals. The first act of the story comes to a close on an uncertain note, with so much established, with a stunning victory and a sound catastrophe in a single night. That's a pretty gutsy move, but it's written and executed in such a smart way that it works perfectly. The next episode, and every subsequent one, follows the next step for these characters after about a decade after the incident at the warehouse. These characters have grown and developed over the course of those years while retaining the overall personality, with one very notable exception. Now, we follow Jinx, formerly known as Powder, on one side with the apparent villains of the story. And we also follow Jace during his escapades in politics. And finally, we follow Vi, who wants to topple Silco and get her sister back. The plot seems simple at first, but it gets complex very quickly. All of the characters have an appropriate amount of focus without the show becoming messy, and we follow our 3 main leads through all sorts of locations and scenarios. But it all seems like a natural continuation of the overarching story and individual plot lines of those characters. The characters drive the story here instead of the characters just showing up in places because the plot demands it. And the story is all the better because of it. The plot is handled with care, not dumbing anything down or downplaying anything that happens. Each and every action has consequences that follow through the world on either side. For example, when Jinx is seen building those robotic firelights, it's not only built up over multiple episodes, but when it pays off, we're treated to the most lethal fireworks show since Mulan, the good one. After that, the consequences of that attack are felt by both sides. This also plays into the overall theme of progress being dangerous if the wrong person uses it. Jace made advances to help people, but when Jinx got her hands on them, she figured out how to weaponize them, something that Jace swore he would never do himself. Then when all of these individual plotlines intersect, even unwittingly, it's simply marvelous because all of these lines seem to correlate.
And the writing here is done in a very smart way, making it seem like everything happens naturally instead of just needing to happen so we can get to the bazooka faster.
That's one of the many things this show has that other modern shows have been lacking lately. Weight. The meaning behind a character's actions and what they represent lends to a unique sense of gravity that things like modern Marvel has been seeming to lack. You get invested in the stakes because they're simple yet painfully complex, and each of the characters are invested in them, but I'll get to that in a minute. It's also worth noting that the show's in-universe politics are a major factor in the plot. Unlike most movies or shows I've seen recently where it tries to push a message, the show never takes sides, showing us the pros and cons of both sides of the debate, while also making no side seem like they're really that much better than the other side. Sure, the council neglects the Undercity, and sure, Silco's a scumbag who's made everything worse, but you can also see the positive sides of them, like the technological progress and Silco caring about Jinx. I realize one is a much smaller scale than the other, but work with me here. It's also that complexity that makes me stop and think. In this world of ours, there aren't traditional heroes or villains, just people, as fallible and susceptible to greed as anybody, regardless of their intentions. No one is demonized, and it's left to the audience to decide who to root for and what to think of these people. Moving on, as a video game adaptation, this show borrows characters, concepts, traits, and such from the source material of League of Legends. But unlike other video game adaptations like Detective Pikachu, for example, you don't require knowledge of the source material beforehand to fully enjoy the show. In fact, if you go in blind like I did, things might go over your head, and being a fan might help on occasion, but nothing that detracts from the show's quality and the overall experience. Every conflict, every interaction, every development, nothing here is superfluous, and it adds to the overall story in some way, however minor or major. I could go on singing the show's praises, including its surprising lack of plot holes, but I already spent a lot of time on this, so I'll slow this train down before we hit a penny on the rail. Arcane's plot is very smartly written by competent writers who have a firm grasp on what makes good storytelling, especially in regard to the character writing. Speaking of which, the characters of Arcane are some of the most complex and interesting you'll ever see in animation. They're all well developed over the course of the series, from the main characters to the more minor ones. They're all able to make an impression regardless of the amount of screen time they have. In fact, I don't think there's a single character I could safely say that I hate without some sort of caveat. They all have varying layers of complexity to the point that an ocean of video essays has been made.
Literally, I had to deal with this flood after typing the show's name in on YouTube.
The amount of time I have to talk about these characters couldn't do them justice, but I'll certainly try to hit all the ones that I want to talk about. First is Vi, voiced by Haley Steinfeld, who you may recognize as Spider-Gwen.
But wasn't she also Kate Bishop in Hawkeye? We don't talk about that abomination around here!
She lost her parents in a war with Piltover and was adopted by Vander, leader of the Undercity. She learned how to fight and how to survive, but as Vander shows, she tends to forget that being de facto leader of her sister and surrogate brothers bears responsibility. She puts on a brave face most of the time, but opens up her tender side to her surrogate family, though she's certainly willing to toughen up with them too. Post-time skip, she's an angry and jaded version of her old self who is firmly cynical, yet not without a spark of hope that her sister is still out there. It's like she's changed as a result of her stay in prison over the time skip, but at the same time, she's stayed the same. Don't shoot me, I swear that made more sense in my head. Vi is one tough cookie, hardened by her upbringing as she tries to cling to the last bit of kindness she has left. She's a product of her surroundings and broken upbringing, and the writers don't shy away from that. Not to mention, she kicks major butt.
We've all had bad days, but we learn.
Next is Powder, who would later become Jinx, voiced by Ella Purnell. As a child, she clung to her sister, Vi, wanting nothing more than to be with her. She was naturally curious and liked to tinker around with machines, and her skills in that department would only grow. Unfortunately, it was one of her inventions that got almost everyone she loved killed on that fateful day at the warehouse. Vi had seemingly rejected her father figure was dead, and so were her brothers, all because of her. She seemed to suddenly be alone in the world. What was she to do? She latched on to the main villain of the series. You know, as you do. But under Silco's tutelage, Powder became unstable as Jinx, a genius mechanic with a lust for wanton destruction and murder. She was good at what she did, but she hung with the wrong crowd and it corrupted her. But not entirely. She cared for Silco like a father, doing what she could to help him, while at the same time dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma and pain from that fateful night. Jinx's insanity and trauma are all a result of her childhood, and it's very easy to see that she is not a healthy girl. As opposed to other crazies in media like Harley Quinn, her insanity is not played for laughs.
I thought you loved me!
Get out of here before I take revenge! I couldn't go near chairs for a month after what she did.
But as a serious problem that has as many boons as there are issues. Also, her trauma is never used to dismiss her heinous actions, but it does explain them to a point. It's covered in a very emotional and hard-hitting way, and it all culminates in one of the most emotional finales I've seen on screen in a long time.
But he didn't make Jinx. You did.
Next on the chopping block is Jace, voiced by Kevin Alejandro. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Who, along with Vi, might be my favorite character in the show, which is fitting because Vi and Jace are foils of sorts. Where Vi is brash and harsh, Jace is curious and cares deeply about others outwardly. Vi is a hit first and ask questions later type, where Jace's love of knowledge and want to understand the world around him is a driving force of his character. Jace was saved at a young age by a wizard, and has since then been trying to harness magic through technology. His mentor, Heimerdinger, feels differently based on his experience with the destructive power that magic can have. But with his newfound partner Victor, Jace manages to crack magic technology in the first 3 episodes. Post-time skip, this hex tech, as it's called, is being used regularly, and Jace is heralded as Piltover's golden boy. His fame causes him to get elected as a city councilman, and he tries to handle his new responsibilities in the ring of politics while also trying to hold true to his original intent of making the world better. On top of that, he still cares for his friends and colleagues, showing just how much of a struggle balancing all of that can be. He's gone on record stating that he never intended for Hextech to be used as a weapon, but as time goes on, he ends up making a weapon for himself out of a desire for something to be done more than anything. And when Jace eventually does step out onto the battlefield with his trademark Mercury hammer, he ends up realizing that violence isn't the right way to handle this complex situation. All of this ends up changing him, making him realize that sometimes there isn't always a perfect solution where everyone walks away happy.
We'll do what we do best.
Next is Vander, leader of the Undercity, voiced by J.B. Blanc. Blanc? Blank? Plank? Earning a nickname as Hound of the Underground, Vander fought in the war with Piltover and has since retired from fighting. He doesn't want to start another war because he's seen what can be lost. He's in a position where he's trying to do his best and work out compromises to keep the peace, fearing the amount of losses another war could bring. It's shown that he's a well-respected man by many in the Undercity, but it's made clear that not everybody is happy with him. We don't get to spend too much time with him before he, kicks the bucket. But Vander shows above all that he deeply cares about his adopted family and wants to keep them safe. I've seen some ideas about him potentially coming back as Warwick, but let's just say I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah, well, you can't escape the past, right?
Next on the chopping block is Silco, the main villain, voiced by Jason Spizak. He kicks off the show carrying himself with an intimidating presence that's calm and intelligent while simultaneously giving off this sort of "I'll kill you if you so much as breathe the wrong way" kind of vibe that few modern villains manage to pull off correctly. Or if they do pull it off, they don't keep it for very long and instead end up as jokes for the hero to put down. Silco takes all of that and feeds it to a shimmer-enhanced mouse. In the past, he had a bond with Vander, but after he was betrayed and after he found out that Vander wanted to make peace with his enemies, he began to experiment with Shimmer, a performance enhancer that disfigures the user. He's a drug-dealing scumbag with the goal of making the Undercity its own sovereign nation, not ruled by the city of Piltover. Pre-time skip, he's shown as a real shady dude, who, given the chance, I would gladly punch in the teeth. But after Vander's death and his adoption of Jinx, Silco shows that he legitimately cares for someone and or something other than himself or his goals. It's moments between him and Jinx that show he might be a scumbag who does some pretty horrible things, but he's a scumbag who legitimately loves his adoptive daughter, going out on a limb for her and even trying to save her from the consequences of her actions. I'm not saying that the relationship is ideal, my goodness, I am not, but if nothing else, the familial love is definitely there.
You see this, Disney? This is how you make sympathetic villains, and how you do it right. You could have done Kylo Ren in a similar fashion, but no! You have to go and make it weird. I'm just now realizing that that's probably the wrong accent to do with this hat.
The show never justifies Silco's actions or looks at him like a poor, misunderstood soul, but it does show that there's more to him than meets the eye. Pun fully intended. As a final note on him, the scene at Vander's statue where he speaks as if he's speaking to Vander, it's amazing, for lack of a better word. The emotion, the frankness, this is the first time we see him genuinely conflicted about his goals, and I love that.
Is there anything so undoing as a daughter?
Going over all of the characters in this manner would eat up a lot of time, so I'm going to talk about one more character in this manner before addressing the cast as a whole. And that character, funnily enough, is Echo, voiced by Reed Shannon. We're not shown a whole lot of him in the first 3 episodes. He seemed fun enough. The few interactions we had with him was just enough substance to intrigue me, but he wasn't the deepest character compared to our leads. He seemed like the most plot device-y character out of the lot.
But after the time skip, consider my mouth shut, because I have never been more happy to be wrong about a character.
Instead of a somewhat timid tinkerer with a penchant for mischief, Echo is one tough son of a gun with a heart dedicated to the people he saves. He's not technically aligned with either side in the conflict between Piltover and Zon, but his interests lie with the people caught in the middle, those touched by what Silco has done to the Undercity, all under Piltover's nose. Shimmer flows more freely, the enforcers have been paid to look the other way, and Echo had enough. He formed the Firelights to do good and wreck Silco's plans. Also, his fight with Jinx was one of the most stunning battles I've seen in a while. The flashbacks to their childhood, the emotional conflict here is in every expression and movement. Everything about that fight is magnificent, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The rest of these characters, from Milo and Clagger to Heimerdinger to Savika, none of them are really one note. All of these characters, regardless of the amount of screen time they get, make an impression and contribute to the plot in some meaningful way. They all have designs that tell the story as much as they do, with visual details that sometimes require a closer look to comprehend fully. Not to mention, with the characters that appear in League of Legends proper, their looks in Arcane seem like prototypes of their in-game appearances. Let's take Vi, for example. Sure, there's some of the basic elements and pieces of clothing there, but the outfit is still very different, and I appreciate the creators taking the extra mile to not just rip off some watered-down version of the in-game design. As a side note, the actors and actresses here bring their A-game to their roles, and each line delivery shows investment, which is hard to give when only doing voice work. To get back on track, these characters have believable motivations and actions that are consistent with their established character. These characters drive the story instead of the other way around, and it shows. Every line, every gesture, every minute expression. They convey the character's personality and reactions so well, I've been floored.
So floored, in fact, that I am now doing business as a carpet. And yes, I do in fact match the drapes.
The important characters all receive meaningful development, and on a second viewing, it's amazing to see a character follow the steps to become what they are today. Some of these characters' journeys are more obvious than others, but it shows that the writers understand an important fact about people. The simple fact that not everybody is one note. Slower, character-driven moments are all over this show, and none of them appear unnecessary or like filler, since these moments are just as engaging as the action. No word misplaced, no heart left untouched. This is how you make people care about a large ensemble cast without making things feel artificial or boring. By focusing on them 2 or 3 at a time while taking the time to properly introduce and develop them. But this show is an anomaly in the case of modern character writing because it does something that not many movies or shows do these days. These characters have flaws. For as strong as Vi is, she still blocks with her face. And as good as Jinx is at problem solving, she's very unstable and snaps at inopportune moments. These character flaws define them as much as their strengths, and it can create a compelling story when used correctly. Too many times these days you see characters like Rey or Red Scarab or somebody similar, where they're perfect at everything they attempt and seem like unstoppable so-and-sos as a result with no weaknesses or struggles to speak of. Because of this, they end up boring. Arcane, thankfully, doesn't go the route of living power fantasy, but instead chooses to write flawed and imperfect characters who are more relatable as a result. A sign of good writing is when you recognize that the heroes, despite whatever imperfections they have, can still overcome those imperfections to win the day. It shows that no obstacle can stand in your way if you work hard enough at it. It's a trait of good storytelling that Arcane fully embodies, and I love it for that. On that note, now seems like as good a time as any to say that nobody necessarily seems like they're wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. The actions of the antagonists are not something I would condone in any circumstance, but the way this story and the characters are written, everybody believes they're in the right with what they're doing, and they think that achieving their goals is the right call. Our heroes aren't paragons of virtue and amazing power all the time, and our villains aren't total dirtbags and the embodiment of evil all the time. It goes back to the old adage, everyone is the hero of their own story. You can understand these characters even if you don't agree with them. All in all, the character writing is magnificent. Each of them feels like a real person with high and low points. With such a wide range of personalities and a distinct knack for designs, the characters all earn an A+ in my book. Sound is a pivotal aspect of any visual medium, though you wouldn't notice it at first. The sound of a step seems like a good example. From the sound someone makes when they walk, you can tell a few things. How heavy they are, what kind of shoes or boots they're wearing, and sometimes even things like personality, just from the gait and such. Now, I'm going to play this scene for you and listen closely. Alright, now let's watch the same scene again with different noises. See what I mean? With weird choices in sound design, the hits don't feel so impactful. But if you listen to it with the sounds from the first one, sounds that actually fit the impact, voila! You have a much more engaging experience. And these sound effects in this show, mamma mia, these sound effects, they fit everything. And the sound just makes the scene come more alive as a result. Whether it's the ambient noise of a quieter scene, or the sound of Vi smacking a guy in the next week with a heavy metal fist, no noise is wasted, fitting whatever's on screen. If something is meant to be heavy, then by Jove, the sound conveys that. On a similar note, the music. The orchestral and techy musical tracks are masterfully strung together to create the desired atmosphere for each and every scene. And regardless of what tone they're trying to set, there's this intensity present in the music. I can't really explain it, but it just pulls you into a scene and holds you there, hanging off of everybody's words as a result, due in no small part to the terrific voice work, but the music only serves to build on that and make it all the more memorable. And that's without going into the musical tracks that actually have lyrics. There are 11 musical tracks in Arcane that feature vocals, which are, shock of all shocks, spectacular. Aside from just being bops on their own, these tracks work well with the scene they're played in to add a perfect atmosphere. And in some cases, like Guns for Hire by Woodkid, they're framed as a metaphor for what's happening in the story at that point, further expressing the emotions in a manner that narration or dialogue simply wouldn't accomplish. It strikes a much more emotional chord that makes me appreciate the smart writing as a result. And there's absolutely no reason for me to individually rank these tracks. Dirty Little Animals, Where Everything Went Wrong, Our Love, Welcome to the Playground, Dynasties in Dystopia, Snakes, Goodbye, Misfit Toys, What Could Have Been, Guns for Hire, Enemy. Nope, no reason at all. Actually, speaking of that last song, the intro sequence of Arcane is a simple affair, but it's also really complex if you look at it. It tells so much story, yet leaves us, the audience, craving more. It's a series of pans across a bunch of mostly stationary statues, most likely hyper-realistic 3D models, but that's not near as boring as it sounds on paper. The details in the statues are intricate, on beat with the music, and the statues give us an impression of what the characters are all about. Vander wants to protect the girls, Jace is curious about the nature of the crystals, so on and so forth. And for the climactic finale of this killer of an intro, a scene of Jinx and Vi fighting each other. Something that never happens in the show.
0 out of 10 clickbaity, worst show of the year. IGN.
And the intro scene is set to an orchestral version of Enemy by Imagine Dragons? How does Imagine Dragons manage to sound this epic?
This particular version of Enemy is a song that's not only catchy, but the vocals are included in this epic version, slowly building in intensity until a huge bass drop, which I didn't know was possible with symphony instruments. And the way the intensity continues until a massive payoff with the title card, it's something that needs to be experienced to truly be appreciated. Everything about it is so masterfully crafted, and you can tell they had fun putting this together. Actually, speaking of fun... Now look, I could ramble on for hours about the show's technical proficiency, about the music, about the acting, but where the animators and sound designers are pushed to their absolute limits is the fight scenes.
Fight scenes. You want it? It's yours, my friend.
Due to the animation being done from the ground up without motion capture, the rules of reality could be easily bent to conform to a given scenario, like punching someone with that amount of force in mid-air. It's also less costly than live action, I'd wager.
None of these fights are arbitrary, and they all seem like they have a natural reason for happening and are the consequences of the character's actions, instead of, we must fight because the plot demands it!
Every conflict is earned, and everyone has a stake in it, whether personal or communal. The fight choreography is splendid, showing off the combatants' fighting styles in a manner not too in your face, but just obvious enough that somebody not well versed in fight scenes could tell. In Arcane's fights, each style is distinct and works off each other to create what can only be described as art in motion, with Vi and Jace versus the Chem Tank guards coming to mind. we have two combatants against a small army, with Vi's Atlas gauntlets and Jace's Mercury hammer keeping it from getting boring against the speedy antics of the chem tank guards. Fast attacks, flashes of light, a song in the background that isn't overwhelming the sound of combat. It's a total thrill ride that the animators and storyboard artists must have had a lot of fun with. As for fights that carry more emotional weight, Echo vs. Jinx is one that I'll think of every time. These are two characters who spent most of their childhood together up until the warehouse went kablooey. It's implied that they haven't spoken with each other since, but in a very artsy sequence, Echo flashes back to a simpler time when he and Powder were just playing together, interspersed with images of themselves in the present. It tugs on the heartstrings for a moment before the fight proper begins. In a few short moves, Echo has Jinx pinned, and what's left of Powder in Jinx appears to be pleading with him to hold off. Without saying a word to each other since the very beginning, so much is conveyed about the nature of their relationship. Neither of them wants to do this to each other, but it's come to that thanks to Silco's influence and the Council's negligence up to this point. Then, Jinx pulls a grenade, not fighting back, but seemingly content to die with her friend. Darn it, Arcane, you've already ripped out my heart once. Do you really want to foot the bill for another heart transplant? Bottom line, the fights in Arcane are spectacular, blending magnificent writing, effects, choreography, and dramatic weight to create an all-you-can-beat buffet. So you want my final verdict, huh? Well, I'll give it to you straight. Arcane is a fabulous show. The animation is near flawless. The designs are top-notch. The writing is fabulous. Really, there's no end to the amount of praise I could heap on this show for how it strikes a balance between being action-packed and being smartly written. I absolutely adore the characters. The fight scenes put a smile on my face, and there were no major flaws or plot holes that I could discern. This kind of show only comes around once every few years. The kind of show that can make me feel such a range of emotion towards the characters in such a comparatively short time frame and get me truly invested. So, taking everything into account, I hereby bestow upon Arcane the coveted rank of 10 out of 10! But what do you guys think? Do you agree with me and think Arcane is one of the best shows out there? Or do you disagree with me and want to put my eyeballs on a pair of toothpicks for daring to compliment such a thing? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Heck, share this video around if you want.
This has been M from the green screen. Have a nice day, everybody.